Our passage this morning is really a transition from the first half of the book in telling us who Jesus is by showing us some of the things that he did to the second half of the book in telling us why Jesus came. And so we're going to begin in Mark chapter 8 and verse 27. Now Jesus and his disciples went to the towns of Caesarea Philippi, and on the road he asked his disciples, saying to them, "Who do men say that I am?" And so they answered, "John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Christ." And then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. Jesus is the furthest north that we know about in Caesarea Philippi. And on the road with his disciples, he asked them a question. He says, "Who do men say that I am?" And they gave him all kinds of different answers. John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets, some of the big Jewish figures. So that's what other people thought. And so he had another question. He says, "Who do you say that I am?" And I'm thankful that Peter had the sense enough about him to say, "You are the Christ." Now, Matthew 16 adds, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," which would have made a lot of sense because in Caesarea Philippi, there was a lot of dead gods, gods that didn't exist. And so he recognized who he was. How did he come to that conclusion? Well, it was because of everything that we've seen so far in the book of Mark. The things that Jesus did just was evidence of who he was. So let's continue reading in verse 31. It says, "And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." And he spoke this word openly, and then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he turned around and looking at the disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." So having been declared the Christ, he's going to tell them some of the things that the Christ came to do while he's here on this earth. I think he was just trying to prepare the apostles for some of the events that would take place and some of the things that they would have to endure. So he says, "I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be rejected by the Jewish leaders, by the religious leaders," which is kind of crazy. "And my suffering is going to escalate into my death. And on the third day, I'm going to be raised." You could imagine the shock that would come across the apostles. That's not how the Jews perceived the Messiah. They thought the Messiah was going to come and split the throat of the Romans, run them out, and reign on the throne forever. That Israel was finally going to come into power. And so this would have been a really shocking revelation. And so Peter decided, notice Jesus had done that openly. And Peter decided, well, it'd be better not to embarrass Jesus, but to kind of pull him aside, and he rebuked him. And you kind of hear Peter's pride come into this, thinking, no, you're not. That's not why you came to this earth. That's not what the Messiah is supposed to do. And I didn't leave everything behind to follow you just so you can die. Can't you kind of hear Peter saying that? Well, what did we just hear Peter say about Jesus? That he's the Christ, which means he's the king. And Peter decided that he was going to jump out in front and he's going to tell the king how to run his kingdom because he obviously doesn't know what's best. So Jesus begins to rebuke Peter out in front of all the apostles. And he says, no, you're mindful of the things of men. You're not mindful of the things of God. And he calls him Satan. He says, "You get behind me. Remember, you're following me. Remember, I'm the Christ. And this is my kingdom. And you're not going to tell me how to run it." And so how often when we hear Jesus say something that we don't like, we think, "Oh, well, yeah, I know he said that, but yeah, he doesn't really know what's best. Instead, I'm going to do this." Remember, he's our Lord. He's our King. We're here to do what he tells us to do. So we need to be following what Jesus says. That's kind of a challenge for us, something to think about through the rest of our day.